Good evening. This is Jeff Greenewalt, your friendly railroad tycoon and chair of the History Consortium. Welcome to another installment of Railroad Week. This evening, we've got a special treat for you. We've got Franklin County's Iron Furnaces and the Railroad, presented by the Franklin County Historical Society. Our speaker this evening is Mike Marotte III. And he's from Chambersburg. He is also the historian of the Chambersburg Fire Department. He writes a local newspaper column called Time Travelers. And Mike also hosts a local radio talk show about local history. So this is a man with some great credentials. And so we'll turn it over to the Franklin County Historical Society.
My name is Mike Marotte III. I'm going to be speaking to you this evening about Franklin County's iron furnaces and the railroad, the champions of iron. This evening I'd like to speak to you about the fantastic, fabulous, well-detailed and built furnaces of Franklin County. Anyone knows that if they ever drove through Franklin County, all the beautiful scenic area that we have. We are very fortunate to have a few of the original furnaces still standing today. The furnaces of long ago that are standing, for example, Franklin Furnace. We have one that's been recreated and renovated at Caledonia. There's also the one at Carrick Furnace, which is up in Path Valley. These furnaces were pretty much usually the same design. They would range 40 foot square at the base. They would taper to the top of their stack, which was 30 feet. And of course, then they would be approximately 30 feet high. Now, it was important that when these furnaces were built, they were built into the side of a bank that was easy access for the material to be supplied in preparation to making the iron. Now, one of the first ones that I like to talk about of all the iron furnaces in Franklin County, which I have four are very interesting of my favorites of this topic. The first one I'll talk to you about is founded by the Chambers brothers, Benjamin, George, and William Chambers in 1783 at a location they call as Mount Pleasant, 3 miles north of Fort Loudon. This was a beautiful area, and these three brothers, in the course of a year, their normal production was approximately 5,000 tons of iron that was produced a year. This furnace, unfortunately, would be disbanded and not operated in 1834. Shortly after this time, there's a pair of brothers, Peter and Daniel All, well-known gentlemen in the business of ore and so on with their railroad out of Cumberland County. They come to Franklin County and they're quickly absorbing, buying all the necessary surrounding property, as this area was extremely well versed in a high quality of ore. Naturally, there was a lot of wood, which they would need to make their charcoal. And the All brothers were starting to get tight with their money. It was the capital was very, very thin, and they wanted to sell this property and get a quick turnover of the capital. We now focus to Reading, Pennsylvania, a gentleman by the name of Richmond L. Jones. Richmond L. Jones is a very prominent attorney located in Reading, Pennsylvania. Him and his band of investors start a company, Southern Pennsylvania Mining and Iron Company. Now, when Mr. Jones has been appointed the president of this firm, he comes to Richmond Furnace, or I should say, to Mount Pleasant. This eventually will be called Richmond's Furnace because Richmond L. Jones builds a new furnace on the site of the predecessor, the Chambers brothers. And everyone then called it Richmond's Furnace. Now, during this time, Richmond Jones, they were producing some iron, obviously, but here again, it takes a lot of capital. It takes the proper management and also the supplies and the manpower to do a proper job. Now, during these days, When this iron was made, naturally horse-drawn wagons were used. But in order to get a quick turnaround with your investment, your money that you've put out, you had to have rail capabilities. Railroad was the magnificent means of transportation. So when Richmond Jones was attempting to build the line, they would go as far as Marion, where they would connect with the famous Cumberland Valley Railroad, which Cumberland Valley Railroad was originally constituted and chartered in 1831, but was dormant and then had to be reestablished and chartered in 1835. The Cumberland Valley Railroad would last until June the 2nd of 1919, when the Pennsylvania Railroad totally absorbed it. However, you will learn that the Cumberland Valley Railroad was a very big player in many things over the years. If anyone familiar with the line and their involvement with business within the Cumberland Valley, they were very extensive. They were into everything. Now, the Cumberland Valley, by 1872, late 1872, the President Thomas B. Kennedy and also the Vice President, who was John Stuart, they were both attorneys, very good friends, and they get involved that they feel that they need to purchase the assets of the Southern Pennsylvania Iron Railroad. They do purchase it, and shortly thereafter, in 1872, upon their purchase, there was people from New York who wanted to purchase their properties they just had bought from the All Brothers and Jones, that they wanted to pay $625,000 for these assets that the two former owners had held. They decided to hold on to this property. The Cumberland Valley Railroad now would change it to the Southern Pennsylvania Mining and Railroad Company, and they would produce iron from the furnace there until 1890, at which time Richmond Jones's furnace that he established in 1865 is dismantled. Now, during the years of 1874 and 1875, as I mentioned, the high volume of quality ore was mined up there by the Cumberland Valley Railroad employees, and it was approximately 43 ton over the period of 2 years that was transported from Richmond Furnace to Chambersburg, and there to other branches where industries would use this high quality of ore. Now, the Cumberland Valley Railroad at Richmond Furnace also had a magnificent harvest of trees, chestnut trees, and also they would have a lake up there that they would harvest ice in the winter. They had a regular ice house, and there was carloads of ice that was hauled out of there. They were into everything, making money. The road to Cowan's Gap today, if anyone's ever been up there, the road how it winds up towards Cowan's Gap. If you look to the right as you're going up towards Cowan's Gap, you can see the very rounded out shapes of holes is where the ore was dug out. As there was a railroad that went up towards Cowan's Gap, and of course the workers that would dig the ore out, they would put it in those cars and come back down to the main yard. Now, as we move on to another favorite furnace of mine, I'm looking at Franklin Furnace. Franklin Furnace was established in 1828 by Peter and George Housen. These two individuals come from Berks County to start their establishment. And Peter is well involved in inventing things, and also as far as an engineer. Now, these two gentlemen, they would make a big difference in this area, because the furnaces that were built at this time naturally were the large rocks, the large stones put into place so intricately, but also at the necessary locations. You would see the iron binders to hold these key stones in place. Now, it's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, of how these were built into the bank. Naturally, the workers then would come into this wooden structure that was above the top of the stack of the furnace, and they'd put the ingredients in there obviously needed, the flux and the ore and the charcoal into the furnace for the finished product. Now, down below was a finished area where the iron would come out naturally, and then the wagons would back in, and they'd take the iron from the facility and they take it to towns or to the nearest railroad place. However, the Housums, during their day, as they owned the Franklin furnace, they would haul all their iron by wagon to Chambersburg, and then eventually other buyers, other people interested in this business, these businessmen, there's approximately 4 different business firms over the years who purchased the former Franklin furnace that were owned by the Housum family. Now, all goes well for these gentlemen for a very short period of time, but it takes a lot of capital. And you have to have capital for your manpower to get these ingredients, as I mentioned, especially the charcoal, the ore, and so on. And they would quickly change hands. There was 2 gentlemen by the name of David Hunter and also Levi Springer, very good friends. They formed a partnership and they purchased the Franklin furnace. Now, Levi Springer, a very, very interesting gentleman. This gentleman not only will have this furnace, but as you'll learn, he goes and gets involved with another furnace. Mr. Springer, while at the Franklin furnace, him and his partner, they have approximately 100 men in time on their payroll. He also establishes what we know as Franklin Park. There was a small lake there. There was a picnic area. And also he built homes for his workers. He went on also that he would build homes for his house, for the homes for his employees. He also would build a store, and he also operated a post office out of the store. Now, Mr. Springer, his wife one day, second wife, comes out on the porch and she admires the beauty of the area, all the fruit trees, the flowers, so on. And she explains to her husband, Levi, said about how beautiful everything. She said, this reminds me of something that you would see in the Garden of Eden. So automatically this area, this village was named Edenville. So today everyone will say the Franklin furnace at Edenville, because out of all this creation and the beauty, Mr. Springer's second wife acknowledges about the beauty of the area. And this is how the small village of Edenville comes about. Now, also Edenville, in that area, the explorers from Chambersburg and other areas would come out there to camp and learn about the survival off the land. But the Franklin Park was a very popular place for many years that people would go relax and have a good time. Now, Mr. Springer and Mr. Hunter would operate this furnace, the Franklin furnace, till the early 1880s. The quantity of ore was starting to slow down as well, and they focused more direction because the cost of transporting the iron that they produced at Franklin furnace, they had no railroad to do this. However, at one time there was talks of building a railroad, but unfortunately the Cumberland Valley Railroad and other gentlemen of the time did not want to invest their capital in doing so. But Levi Springer, being the inventive person that he was, he figured, why not, he tells his partner, Mr. David Hunter, why not go to Chambersburg? And of course they have a discussion. They come to Chambersburg and they locate and build a furnace on Grant Street. As you're going north on 2nd Street in Chambersburg, you'll make a right onto Grant Street and you'll go a very short distance. On the right, naturally, the Cumberland Valley Railroad was on the right and the left, and the Cumberland Valley Railroad yards were known as the Franklin Yards. However, on the right is where the 2 gentlemen have workers build the Falling Spring furnace. Now, it was next to the Falling Spring Creek. However, what was interesting, when these 2 gentlemen built this furnace, approximately 1880 in Chambersburg, they approached the borough of Chambersburg about the usage of water and the cost. Well, the cost was exuberant at that time. So Mr. Hunter and Springer got their heads together. We don't need the borough's water. We have the Falling Spring Creek. So they diverted the water into the Falling Spring furnace. They operated these 2 gentlemen operated the Falling Spring furnace in Chambersburg approximately 3 to 4 years, at which time the partnership of Bonebrake and Burkhart approached them and buy their establishment. They continued production of this iron until 1890, which time the furnace was dismantled. Now you may ask, where did the ore come from to supply the Falling Spring furnace, since there's not an ore deposit in that area? The ore was shipped in from Chambersburg. A family by the name of Kressler had an ore bank, and there was also ore transported from Green Village that was brought to Chambersburg. But what was nice, the railroad had two lines, rail lines, directly adjacent to the Falling Spring furnace, one for the raw product of the ore to come in, and two for the finished product of the iron to go out. So it was a win-win situation in that facility. That was the only iron furnace, naturally, that was ever located in the borough of Chambersburg. And Mr. Levi Springer, then a few years later, passes away. He's buried at the Cedar Grove Cemetery on North Franklin Street in Chambersburg. Now I'll go, last but not least, obviously, to one of my favorites, is the Mont Alto Park, the Mont Alto Furnace. The Mont Alto Furnace originally were started by the Hughes family in 1807. This was a very nice furnace that operated, and of course everything that was created in the finished product that time, because there was absolutely no railroads, was transported by horse-drawn wagon down to Williamsport, Maryland, to the C&O Canal, at which time their finished product of iron was transported. In time, they start slowing their production down. Things get worn out, dilapidated. We have a gentleman by the name of George B. Weisling, George Berryhill Weisling, born in Dauphin County. This gentleman was a very creative, knowledgeable individual of many things. He was an engineer and helped design and build some of the different railroads, the tunnels, and so on. And he also is enlisted in the Civil War. However, he developed some health issues during the Civil War. He becomes a colonel, and the colonel then, as he is discharged during the Civil War, he decides to come to Mont Alto, at which he buys the former Hughes property off one of the sons of Mr. Hughes, and at which time, because it was so dilapidated at Mont Alto, at the furnace, he quickly gets a force of men together, and they recreate, redesign, and expand the original furnace at Mont Alto. As he's producing pretty much like 5,000 tons of ore a day, he wants to expand it. He's reaching a course of 15,000 tons a day through his renovations, expansion. By 1872, he's figuring, I can do better than transporting all this finished product of iron to Chambersburg by rail. Why not build my own line? So at this point, Mr. Weisling, Colonel Weisling, gets 100 of his men together, and they build a railroad from his furnace at Mont Alto to a point near Chambersburg, 10.5 miles, to connect with the Cumberland Valley Railroad. Now you're thinking payday, absolutely. Now, instead of using the horse-drawn wagons, the manpower to do that, this slow pace, now I have my own railroad. Now I have a rail line directly to the furnace. My finished product goes on there, Chambersburg it goes, and from there beyond. Now my capital is going to have a quicker turnaround coming in. Now I can do more and expand with my funds that are coming back in. As he's doing this with his railroad, he has another thought. Because of the beauty of the mountain and the forest and all the property that he had owned, he expanded. And of course, his farms that he owned nearby, all the food that was harvested would support his workers at the furnace. Also on Sunday, none of his employees had to work. That was a Sabbath day. However, Mr. Weisling, Colonel Weisling, thought in 1875, because of the beauty, let's further expand on my railroad. Let's build a park because of the beauty. Everyone liked going to a park. Well, during this time when Colonel Weisling builds this park, he now is going to have to expand with his railroad. Naturally, he has more engines. Now he's going to have passenger cars. And now he's going to have money coming and going because the park with all the patrons coming to enjoy the festivities at the park and the finished product of the iron, that literally his trains were taking the money out and bringing it in. And at one time, his park was considered one of the finest picnic grounds in the United States, which he proclaimed that very clearly. Also, up here at Mont Alto, he was an avid lover of growing grapes. And of course, there's many times that he shipped these crates because of the very large arbors. They were shipped out by train as well on his line to the Cumberland Valley Railroad, which there was times he sent some to Chambersburg for T.B. Kennedy, the president of the Cumberland Valley Railroad. Now, as Mr. Weisling, as I mentioned earlier, had health issues. And by the late 1880s, he was having major problems. The two doctors came from Chambersburg to Mont Alto to take care of him. However, it was unfortunate. In June of 1891, Colonel George B. Weisling passes away at his home in Mont Alto. But fear not, his brother Edward steps forward and he assumes operations of the Grand Mont Alto furnace. With this, he makes additional changes that he went from 35 tons a day, which was magnificent, of the iron being shipped out by rail. He now jumps to 51 tons a day, which was probably noted to be one of the largest, if not the largest, productions of iron per day in the country. However, it comes to be in the early 1890s that part of it is sold to the Pennsylvania Forest Commission because of all the forest and so on. Now we look by 1890, after the large fire, destructive fire of 1889 that developed, that the furnace was rebuilt, it comes along that Mr. Weisling, Edward Weisling, wants to disband his operations at Mont Alto Furnace. And the furnace obviously is dismantled. But by 1902, the Pennsylvania Commission comes about and organizes and makes Mont Alto as the state's first state forestry park. And when you look at these grounds today, as you go up there, naturally you have the Mont Alto school up there, which is Penn State University in Mont Alto. In the early days when the Forestry Commission got these grounds, there was many people that attended this forestry school, many well-known people. And you can see from George B. Weisling's creation, not only of the railroad, he reestablished this grand furnace and also the park. He put so much back into the land. And at one time, Mr. Weisling had approximately 500 employees. Now, the pictures that you'll see within this presentation are supporting images of the different areas that I've mentioned today. I hope you've enjoyed all this, and it's always a privilege and honor to address anyone with our local history and promote it sometime in your area of Chambersburg. Please feel free to stop by the old jail on King Street, known as Franklin County Historical Society. Ann Hall, our executive director, or any of her capable staff will be glad to meet you, give you a tour of our facilities, and explain to you our other beautiful historic treasures of Chambersburg and Franklin County. Thank you, everyone, for this time.